All right, welcome back to Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Good evening to all of you. And it is episode 23, Wednesday, September 7th, 2022. Tonight we're looking at the second of two games. We looked at Risk back on Monday. And, of course, this is the second show of our second season. Tonight we're looking at a game that has been around a long time. In fact, it's the most widespread member of the large family of table games, or a type of board game played with counters and dice on table boards. And this family of games dates back nearly 5,000 years to Mesopotamia and Persia, where the earliest record of backgammon itself dates to the 17th century England, being descended from the 16th century game of Irish. Literally, I just gave it away. Yeah. So we're looking at backgammon tonight on Jay's Retro Toys and Games. Good evening to those who are listening out there in Anchor and Spotify, and of course those of you who are in the Facebook group pages. Thank you very much for your continued support of the show. It's another edition of Jay's Retro Toys and Games on this Wednesday, September 7th, 2022. Hope your week is going good. Happy Hump Day to all of you. You know about Hump Day, right? In the middle of the week, right? You know about that. So we're looking at, as I was saying before, we're looking at the game of backgammon, and I gave a little bit of a history, but as you know, it's a two-player game in which each player has 15 pieces, known traditionally as men, or short for table men, but often known as checkers in the U.S., and these pieces move along 24 points according to the roll of two dice. The objective of the game is to move the 15 pieces around the board and be first to bear off. Example, remove them from the board. Backgammon involves a combination of strategy and luck from rolling dice. And while the dice may determine the outcome of a single game, the better player will accumulate the better record over a series of many games. With each roll of the dice, players must choose from numerous options for moving their pieces and anticipate possible counter moves by the opponent. The optional use of a doubling cube allows players to raise the stakes during the game. Well, contrary to popular belief, backgammon is not the oldest board game in the world, nor are all table games variants of backgammon. In fact, the earliest known mention of backgammon was in a letter dated 1635, when it was emerging as a variant of the popular medieval Anglo-Scottish game of Irish. The latter was described as a better game. And by the 19th century, however, backgammon had spread to Europe, where it rapidly superseded other table games like trick-track in popularity, and also to America, where the doubling cube was introduced. In other parts of the world, different table games such as Nard or Nardi are better known. And backgammon is a recent member of the large family of table games that date back to ancient times. The following is an overview of their development up to the time when backgammon appeared on the scene. The history of table games can be traced back nearly 5,000 years to archaeological discoveries in the Jaraft culture located in present-day Iran. The world's oldest game set of board, counters, and dice have been discovered in the region. The royal game of that's UR, from 2600 BCE, may also be an ancestor or intermediate of modern-day table games like backgammon. It used tetrahedral dice and various other board games spanning 10th to 7th centuries BC have been found throughout modern-day Iraq, Syria, Israel, Egypt, and western Iran. The Persian tables game of Nard or Nard-Sur emerged somewhere between the 3rd and 6th century AD. One text linking it with Ardashir, founder of the Sasanian dynasty, whereas another attributes it to Bozagromer Bokatang, the vizier of Rosro or Hosro, who is credited with the invention of the game. Wow, these names are amazing. Tabula or tabula, meaning table, tabula, or board in Byzantine Greek, is described in an epigram of Byzantine Emperor Zeno, and the overall aim was identical, and the board had the same basic layout with 24 points, 12 on each side, and there were 15 counters per player. However, there were 3 cubical dice, not 2. Modern backgammon follows the same rules as tabula for hitting a blot and bearing off. The key differences were the use of an extra die and starting with all pieces off the board. The rules for re-entering checkers in backgammon is the same as that for initially entering pieces in tabula. The name taban is still used in Greece for their versions of tables, where it is frequently played in town palatius and cafes. And town palatius, that's almost like kind of like your cafes and your small bistros, you know. The tabai of Emperor Zeno's time is believed to be a direct descendant of the earlier Roman ludius duodecim scriptorum, or the game of 12 lines, with the board's middle row of points removed and only the 2 outer rows remaining. The game of 12 lines used a board with 3 rows of 12 points each, with the 15 pieces being moved in opposing directions by the 2 players across 3 rows, according to the roll of the 3 cubical dice. Now, little specific text about the gameplay of Ludius Duodecim Scriptorium has survived, and it may have been related to the older ancient Greek dice game Kubeia, or Kubeia. The earliest known mention of the game is in Ovid's Ars Amatoria, or The Art of Love, written between 1 BC and 8 AD. In Roman times, this game was also known as Aliyah. Western Europe. The table games, they first appeared in France during the 11th century and became a favorite pastime of gamblers. In 1254, Louis IX issued a decree prohibiting his court officials and subjects from playing. They were played in Germany in the 12th century and had reached Iceland by the 13th century. In Spain, the Alfonso X manuscript, Libro de los Juegos, completed in 1283, describes rules for a number of dice and table games in addition to its discussion of chess. By the 17th century, games at tables had spread to Sweden, and a wooden board and counters were recovered from the wreck of the Vasa among the belongings of the ship's officers. Table games appear widely in paintings of this period, mainly those of Dutch and German painters such as Van Ostade, Jan Steen, Hieronymus Bosch, and Bruegel. Among surviving artworks are Card Sharps by Caravaggio. Card Sharps. Sounds like card sharks, doesn't it? Yep. Now, here's the codification of backgammon. The ancestry of backgammon has been debated amongst scholars. And what is known is that its immediate predecessor was the 16th century tables game of Irish. Irish was the Anglo-Scottish equivalent of the French toutes tables and Spanish todas tablas, the latter being recorded in the 1283 El Libro de los Juegos, a translation of Arabic manuscripts by the Toledo School of Translators. Irish had been popular at the Scottish court of James IV and considered to be the more serious and solid game, when the variant, which became known as backgammon, began to emerge in the first half of the 17th century. In medieval Italy, Barrel was played on a backgammon board, with the important difference that both players moved their pieces counterclockwise and starting from the same side of the board. The game rules are recorded in a 13th century manuscript held in the Italian National Library in Florence. The earliest mention of the game under the name of BACKGAMMON or backgammon, was by James Howell in a letter dated 1635. In English, the word backgammon is most likely derived from back and Middle English gammon, meaning game or play. And meanwhile, the first use documented by the Oxford English Dictionary was in 1650. In 1666, it is reported that the old name for backgammon used by Shakespeare and others was tables. However, it is clear from Willoughby that tables was a generic name and that the phrase playing at tables was used in a similar way to playing at cards. In the 16th century, Elizabethan laws and church regulations had prohibited playing at tables in England, but by the 18th century, backgammon had superseded Irish and become popular among the English clergy. Edmund Hoyle published a short treatise on the game of backgammon in 1753, and this described rules and strategy for the game and was bound together with a similar text on whist. The early form of backgammon was very similar to its predecessor Irish. The aim, board, number of pieces or men, direction of play, and starting layout were the same as in the modern game. However, there was no doubling die, there was no bar on the board, or the bar was not used, men simply being moved off the table when hit, and the scoring was different. The game was won double if either the winning throw was a doublet or the opponent still had men outside the home board. It was won triple if a player bore all men off before any of the opponent's men reached the home board. This was a backgammon. Some terminology, such as point, hitting a blot, home, doublet, bear off, and men are recognizably the same as in the modern game. Others, such as binding a man, adding a second man to a point, binding up the tables, and taking all one's first 6 points. Foregame, ladder game, nipping a man, hitting a blot and playing it on forwards, playing at length, using both dice to move one man, are no longer in vogue. And by no later than 1850, the rules of play had changed to those used today. Table boards were now made with a bar in the center, and men that were hit went on to the bar. Winning double or by 2 hits was achieved by bearing all one's men off before the other has borne any, and this was now called a gammon. If the winner bore off all men while the loser still had men in his adversary's table, it was a backgammon and worth 3 hits. Example, triple. Now, the most recent major development in backgammon was the addition of the doubling cube. It was first introduced in the 1920s in New York City among members of gaming clubs in the Lower East Side. The cube required players not only to select the best move in a given position, but also to estimate the probability of winning from that position, transforming backgammon into the expected value-driven game played in the 20th and 21st centuries. The popularity of backgammon surged in the mid-1960s, in part due to the charisma of Prince Alexis Oblinsky, who became known as the father of modern backgammon. Ob, as he was called by friends, co-founded the International Backgammon Association, which published a set of official rules. He also established the World Backgammon Club of Manhattan, devised a backgammon tournament system in 1963, and then organized the first major international backgammon tournament in March of '64, which attracted royalty, celebrities, and the press. The game became a huge fad, was played on college campuses, in discotheques, and at country clubs. Stockbrokers and bankers began playing at conservative men's clubs. People young and old all across the country dusted off their boards and checkers. Cigarette, liquor, and car companies began to sponsor tournaments, and Hugh Hefner held backgammon parties at the Playboy Mansion. Backgammon clubs were formed, and tournaments were held, resulting in a world championship promoted in Las Vegas in 1967. Let's see. In the second half of the 20th century, new terms were introduced in America, such as beaver and checkers for men, although American backgammon experts Jacoby and Crawford continued to use both. Most recently, the United States Backgammon Federation, or the USBGF, was organized in 2009 to repopularize the game in the United States. Board and committee members include many of the top players, tournament directors, and writers in the worldwide backgammon community. The USBGF has recently created a standards of ethical practice to address issues on which tournament rules fail to touch. In its country of origin, the UK Backgammon Federation is the national authority and runs a backgammon championship, the Backgammon Galaxy UK Open Tournament, as well as club championships, online leagues, and knockout tournaments. And like the USBGF, they are active members of the World Backgammon Federation, and their tournament rules have been adopted in their entirety by the WBF. So, simply the rules. Since 2018, backgammon has been overseen internationally by the World Backgammon Federation, who set the rules of play for international tournaments. Backgammon playing pieces may be termed checkers, draughts, stones, men, counters, pawns, discs, pips, chips, or nips. Checkers is in American English and is derived from the game of draughts, which in the U.S. is called checkers. And the objective is for players to bear off all their checkers from the board before their opponent can do the same. And as the playing time for each individual game is short, it is often played in matches where victory is awarded to the first player to reach a certain number of points. The dimensions of a board when opened for a tournament game should be at minimum of 44 centimeters by 55 centimeters to a maximum of 66 by 88. Each side of the board has a track of 12 long triangles called points. The points form a continuous track in the shape of a horseshoe and are numbered from 1 to 24. In the most commonly used setup, each player begins with 15 pieces. 2 are placed on their 24 point, 3 are on their 8 point, and 5 each on their 13 point and their 6 point. The 2 players move their pieces in opposing directions from the 24 point towards the 1 point. Points 1 through 6 are called the home board or inner board, and points 7 through 12 are called the outer board. The 7 point is referred to as the bar point, and the 13 point as the midpoint. Usually the 5 point for each player is called the golden point. To start the game, each player rolls 1 die, and the player with the higher number moves first using the numbers shown on both dice. If the player rolls the same number, they must roll again, leaving the first pair of dice on the board. The player with the highest number on the second roll moves using only the numbers shown on the dice used for the second roll. Both dice must land completely flat on the right-hand side of the game board. The players then take alternate turns, rolling 2 dice at the beginning of each turn. And after rolling the dice, players must, if possible, move their checkers according to the numbers shown on each die. For example, if a player rolls a 6 and a 3, denoted as 6-3, the player must move 1 checker 6 points forward and another or the same checker 3 points forward. The same checker may be moved twice as long as the 2 moves can be made separately and legally. 6 and then 3, or 3 and then 6. If a player rolls 2 of the same number, called doubles, that player must play each die twice. For example, a roll of 5-5 allows the player to make 4 moves of 5 spaces each. On any roll, a player must move according to the numbers on both dice if it is at all possible to do so. If one or both numbers do not allow a legal move, the player forfeits that portion of the roll and the turn ends. If moves can be made according to either one die or the other, but not both, the higher number must be used. If one die is unable to be moved, but such a move is made possible by the moving of the other die, that move is compulsory. In the course of a move, a checker may land on any point that is unoccupied or is occupied by one or more of the player's own checkers. May also land on a point occupied by exactly one opposing checker or blot, and in this case the blot has been hit and is placed in the middle of the board on the bar that divides the 2 sides of the playing surface. A checker may never land on a point occupied by two or more opposing checkers. Thus, no point is ever occupied by checkers from both players simultaneously. There is no limit to the number of checkers that can occupy a point at any given time. Checkers placed on the bar must re-enter the game through the opponent's home board before any other move can be made. A roll of 1 allows the checker to enter on the 24-point, opponent's 1. A roll of 2 on the 23-point, opponent's 2, and so forth, up to a roll of 6, allowing entry on the 19-point or opponent's 6. Checkers may not enter on a point occupied by two or more opposing checkers. Checkers can enter on unoccupied points or on points occupied by a single opposing checker. In the latter case, the single checker is hit and placed on the bar. More than one checker can be on the bar at a time, and a player may not move any other checkers until all checkers on the bar belonging to that player have re-entered the board. If a player has checkers on the bar, but rolls a combination that does not allow any of those checkers to re-enter, the player does not move. If the opponent's home board is completely closed, example, all 6 points are each occupied by two or more checkers, there is no roll that will allow a player to enter a checker from the bar, and that player stops rolling and playing until at least 1 point becomes open, occupied by 1 or 0 checkers due to the opponent's moves. A play is not complete and may be undone and replayed an unlimited number of times until the player removes his or her dice from the board. When all of the player's checkers are in that player's home board, that player may start removing them, and this is called bearing off. The first player to bear off all 15 of their own checkers wins the game. And if the opponent has not yet borne off any checkers when the game ends, the winner scores a gammon, which counts for double stakes. If the opponent has not yet borne off any checkers and has some of the bar or in the winner's home board, the winner scores a backgammon, which counts for triple stakes. They sped up the match play with the doubling cube, and that provided an added dimension for strategy. A doubling cube is usually used. It's not a die to be rolled, but rather a marker with the numbers 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and 64 inscribed on its sides to denote the current stake. When they accept double stakes, the cube is placed on their side of the board with a corresponding power of 2 facing up to indicate that the right to redouble, which is to offer to continue doubling the stakes, belongs exclusively to the player. If the opponent drops the double stakes, they lose the game at the current value of the doubling cube. For instance, if a cube showed the number 2 and a player wanted to redouble the stakes to put it at 4, the opponent choosing to drop the redouble would lose 2 or twice the original stake. And there's no limit on the number of redoubles, although 64 is the highest number depicted on the doubling cube. The stakes may rise to 128, 256, and so on. And in money games, the player is often permitted to beaver when offered the cube, doubling the value of the game again while retaining possession of the cube. Wow. There are many related games. Minor variations to the standard game are common among casual players in certain regions. For instance, only allowing a maximum of 5 men on any point in Britain, or disallowing hit and run in the home board in the Middle East. There are other table games like AC Doocy, which is a relative of a backgammon in which players start with no counters on the board and must enter them onto the board at the beginning of the game. The roll of 1-2 is given special consideration, allowing the player, after moving the 1 and the 2, to select any desired doubles move. A player also receives an extra turn after a roll of 1, 2, or of doubles. You also have Hypergammon, Nard, Golbara or Tapa. Konki is the Chinese tables game. Plakodo, Fevga, and Ports are 3 varieties of the table games played in Greece. Misery, backgammon to lose, is a variant of backgammon in which the objective is to lose the game. And Tavla is the Turkish variation. Then you have your strategy and tactics. And then, of course, they've been known for cheating. And to reduce the possibility of cheating, Most good quality backgammon sets use a precision dice and a dice cup, and this reduces the likelihood of loaded dice being used, which is the main way of cheating in face-to-face play. A common method of cheating online is the use of a computer program to find the optimal move on each turn. To combat this, many online sites use move comparison software that identifies when a player's move resembles those of the backgammon program. Online cheating has therefore become extremely difficult. There was also social and competitive play. In State of Oregon versus Barr, a 1982 court case pivotal to the continued widespread organized playing of backgammon in the U.S., the state argued that backgammon is a game of chance and that it was therefore subject to Oregon's stringent gambling laws. Paul Magro was a key witness for the defense, contradicting Roger Nelson, the expert prosecution witness, by saying game theory, however, rarely applies to games with imperfect knowledge where something is concealed, such as poker. Backgammon is not such a game. Everything is in front of you, and the person who uses that information as the most effective manner will win. After the closing arguments, Judge Stephen S. Walker concluded that backgammon is a game of skill, not a game of chance, and found the defendant, backgammon tournament director Ted Barr, not guilty of promoting gambling. There's also club and tournament plays, international competition, gambling. There's also the cultural significance. As we look, there's also software for it with internet play and play and analysis. And it goes through a whole history. Remember, we're looking at 5,000-year history here, folks, with a lot of countries involved. Very good game, backgammon. Would I play it? Probably not, because I don't like checkers or chess. Table games, to me, more or less don't really interest me. But I know there are a lot of people out there that take this game with a grain of salt. More power to you. Very much. And there you have it, folks. The history and the play, a little bit of the play, of backgammon. Next time on the program, on Friday, we're going to be looking back at our toys. And I got a great toy that's really going to be interesting. Let me see. Yes, we're going to be looking at the very simplistic toy that everybody loves to play with and get their hands on, and if you practice hard enough, boy oh boy, you could be an expert in it. We're going to be looking at the yo-yo, also spelled Y-O-Y-O. Really simple toy. Goes back to the 17th century, and there was proof of existence since 500 BCE. I'm Jason Icanio, thanking you once again for all of us here at Jay's Retro Toys and Games. And remember, be honest, be real, and keep it simple, stupid. Kiss. We'll see you on Friday for the yo-yo. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Don't forget to subscribe to the David3000 Network for great more content like this one.